They called her the Falcon of Valethorn, not because she was graceful, not because she soared above the battlefield with beauty or elegance. They called her the Falcon because when she descended, nothing survived. Veratis Marwyn had earned that name in blood. 12 years of silent kills, 47 confirmed assassinations, countless more that never made it into the records because the bodies were never found. She was the Alpha King's most lethal weapon, his shadow, his blade, his merciless hand of death. And she bowed to no one, not to the council elders who flinched when she entered a room, not to the generals who had watched her slit throats before they could draw their swords. Not even to the Alpha King himself, though she served him with a loyalty that bordered on obsession. Veratis knelt for no living creature, until the night everything changed. It happened at the Blood Moon Summit, where the 5 wolf kingdoms gathered under ancient truce. Veratis stood in her usual position, 3 steps behind the Alpha King, invisible to those who did not know where to look, deadly to those who did. The summit hall was filled with royalty, warriors, and enough political tension to ignite a war. Veratis catalogued every threat, every hidden blade, and every nervous heartbeat. But she did not see him coming. The rogue who breached the eastern window moved faster than any wolf she had ever encountered. His blade was aimed directly at the Alpha King's throat, and for one breathless moment Veratis knew she would be too late. So she did the only thing she could. She lifted her hand, not to throw a blade, not to signal her hidden operatives. She lifted her hand, and the rogue froze mid-air, suspended by an invisible force that rippled through the hall like a shock wave. Silence crashed over the summit. Every wolf in attendance turned to stare at the woman who had just revealed a power that should not exist, a power that had been hunted to extinction 300 years ago. Veratis stared at her own trembling fingers, her heart slamming against her ribs. She had kept this secret for 23 years, and in one moment of desperation, she had destroyed everything. The Alpha King turned slowly, his golden eyes finding hers. She expected fury. She expected betrayal. She expected the execution order that would come within the hour. But Caelthor Varys, the most feared Alpha in 5 centuries, looked at his falcon with something far more dangerous than anger. He looked at her with hunger. Veratis had learned to kill before she learned to speak. The orphanage in the Bleakwood territories did not raise children, it forged weapons. The matrons who ran the facility worked under contract with the highest bidders, selling trained assassins to noble houses, military commanders, and occasionally, the throne itself. Veratis arrived at the orphanage as an infant, abandoned at the iron gates during the worst snowstorm in recorded history. No note, no name, no indication of where she had come from or who had left her there. The matrons called her Foundling 12 for the first 6 years of her life. She earned the name Veratis later, after she killed her first target at age 7. The matrons chose it from an ancient dialect. It meant truth through death. They considered it fitting for a child who had strangled a grown man with a bedsheet and shown no emotion afterward. What the matrons never knew was that Veratis had not killed that man with her hands alone. She had felt something surge through her veins that night. Something hot and electric and terrifying. The man's windpipe had crushed inward before she ever touched him. The bedsheet was merely a cover, a way to explain what could not be explained. Veratis had been hiding her power ever since. The Wolf Kingdoms operated under strict laws regarding supernatural abilities beyond the standard gifts of shifting, enhanced strength, and pack bonds. Those laws existed because of the Veilborn, an ancient bloodline of wolves who could manipulate energy, matter, and in some cases, life itself. The Veilborn had been systematically exterminated 3 centuries ago, hunted by a coalition of all 5 kingdoms who feared their power too much to let them survive. The history texts called it the Purification. The few who remembered called it genocide. Veratis did not know if she was Veilborn. She had no family records, no bloodline documentation, and no way to trace her origins. All she knew was that the power lived inside her like a second heartbeat, and if anyone discovered it, she would be executed without trial. So she buried it. She trained twice as hard as the other foundlings, mastering every weapon, every combat technique, and every method of silent death. She became so lethal with her physical abilities that no one ever thought to question whether she possessed anything more. At 14, she was purchased by the Veilthorn crown. At 16, she completed her first mission for the Alpha King. At 18, she became his falcon, the youngest to ever hold the title, the deadliest to ever carry the name. For 12 years, she had served Kael'thas Varys without question. She had eliminated his enemies, protected his borders, and guarded his life with a ferocity that other warriors found disturbing. She had also kept her power locked so deep inside herself that she sometimes forgot it existed. Until tonight. The suspended rogue still hung in the air, his body frozen in that violent moment of attack. Veratus could feel the energy draining from her, the strain of holding a fully grown wolf motionless against his will. She had seconds before she would collapse. "Release him," the Alpha King commanded, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the summit hall. Veratus obeyed without thinking. The rogue dropped to the marble floor, unconscious from the shock of supernatural restraint. Guards swarmed forward, dragging the would-be assassin away, but no one was looking at the prisoner. Everyone was looking at her. Veratus felt her knees threaten to buckle. 12 years of service, 12 years of perfect loyalty, 12 years of being the most trusted weapon in the kingdom, all of it crumbling because she had acted on instinct instead of protocol. She should have let the blade fall. She should have let the Alpha King die rather than reveal what she was, but she hadn't. And now every royal, every warrior, every whispering diplomat in this hall knew that the Falcon of Veilthorn was something that should not exist. Kael'thas stepped toward her, his massive frame blocking out the flickering torchlight. He was the largest alpha she had ever seen, 6.5 feet of pure, dominant power, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a kingdom and eyes the color of molten gold. Those eyes had witnessed her kill without mercy. They had watched her return from missions soaked in enemy blood. They had observed her operate in the shadows for over a decade, but they had never looked at her like this. "Falcon," he said quietly, using her title rather than her name. "Come with me." The Alpha King's private study was designed for intimidation. Vaulted ceilings stretched toward darkness. Ancient weapons lined the walls. Blades that had carved kingdoms, axes that had shattered armies, a warhammer rumored to have killed 3 alphas in a single battle. The massive oak desk at the center of the room had been built from a tree that was older than the wolf kingdoms themselves. Veratus had been in this room exactly 4 times in 12 years of service. Each visit had preceded a mission that changed the course of history. She stood at attention before the desk, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression carved from stone. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear into the shadows, to use the escape routes she had memorized years ago. But running would confirm guilt. And Veratus refused to die a coward. Kael'thas did not sit behind his desk. Instead, he circled her slowly, his footsteps silent despite his enormous size. She felt his gaze travel across her body, not with desire, but with the calculating assessment of a predator examining unfamiliar prey. "How long?" he asked finally. "My entire life." There was no point in lying. She had revealed herself before 500 witnesses. Deception would only insult them both. "You are Veilborn." "I do not know what I am," Veratus replied evenly. "I was abandoned as an infant. I have no bloodline records. Yet the power exists." "Yes." Kael'thas stopped directly in front of her. This close she could smell his scent. Pine and wood smoke and something darker. Something that spoke of barely restrained dominance. He was an alpha in every sense of the word, and his presence pressed against her like a physical weight. Most wolves would have submitted instinctively. Most wolves would have bared their throats and begged for mercy. Veratus met his eyes without flinching. "You should be dead," he said. "The purification laws are clear. Any wolf displaying Veilborn abilities is to be executed immediately, without trial, without appeal. I am aware of the law. Yet you used your power anyway, to save my life." His golden eyes narrowed. "Why?" Veratus considered the question. She could offer political answers. Her duty to the crown, her oath of service, the strategic importance of protecting her king. All of those answers would be true, but they would not be honest. "Because I could not watch you die," she admitted quietly. "Because in 12 years of serving you, I have never failed to protect you, and I was not going to start tonight." Something shifted in Kael'thor's expression. The calculating assessment melted into something raw, something that made Veratus's heart stutter. "You understand what happens now," he said. "The other kingdoms witnessed your display. By dawn, every ruler in attendance will demand your execution. If I refuse, they will use it as grounds for war. Then execute me." Veratus lifted her chin. "I have never feared death. I only ask that you do it yourself, rather than handing me to the mob." Kael'thor moved so fast she barely tracked him. One moment he stood before her. The next, his hand was wrapped around her throat. Not squeezing, not threatening, and simply holding. His thumb rested against her pulse point, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. "You think I brought you here to kill you?" he growled, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated through her bones. "I think you have no choice. I am the Alpha King. I always have a choice." His grip tightened fractionally, and Veratus felt something stir in her chest. Not fear. She had burned that emotion out of herself years ago. This was something else entirely. This was awareness. Every nerve in her body suddenly recognized his touch, his scent, his overwhelming presence. Her wolf. The part of her she kept caged even more carefully than her Veilborn abilities, surged toward the surface, straining against her control. "No, this could not be happening. I felt it," Kael'thor murmured, his eyes blazing. "The moment you raised your hand, the moment your power touched that assassin, I felt it resonate through my own blood like a call." Veratus's breath caught. "That is not possible." And yet it happened. His thumb stroked across her pulse, almost gentle despite the dominant grip. "I have waited 243 years for my mate, Falcon. I had accepted that she did not exist, that I would rule alone until someone finally managed to put a blade through my heart." The word slammed into Veratus like a physical blow. Mate. The sacred bond that wolves spent lifetimes searching for. The connection that transcended politics, duty, and even death itself. The one thing Veratus had never allowed herself to want, because wanting things made you weak. "You are mistaken," she managed. "I am never mistaken." Kael'thor released her throat, but he did not step back. If anything, he moved closer, his massive body crowding her space until she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You are my mate, Veratis Marwyn, my fated, the other half of my soul." "I am a weapon," she countered, her voice cracking despite her best efforts. "I am a killer. I am Veilborn. I am everything your kingdom has been taught to fear and destroy." "Yes." A slow smile curved his lips, dangerous, possessive, and utterly certain. "Which is why you are the only wolf in existence who could possibly be worthy of me." Veratus opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. Because at that moment, the bond slammed into her like a tidal wave, overwhelming, undeniable, and absolutely terrifying. She felt him, not just his presence in the room, but his essence, his soul, his ancient and terrible power resonating with something deep inside her own chest. The Veilborn energy that lived in her blood recognized the alpha dominance that lived in his, and the two forces tangled together in a connection that could never be severed. Her knees buckled. Kael'thor caught her before she hit the floor, his arms wrapping around her with a gentleness that contradicted every legend told about the brutal Alpha King. "There it is," he whispered against her hair. "There you are." Veratus clutched his shirt with trembling fingers, her entire world shattering and rebuilding itself in the span of a single heartbeat. She was his mate, the Alpha King's fated, and she was the last surviving Veilborn in existence. If the other kingdoms didn't kill her for her power, they would definitely try to kill her for this. Dawn broke over the summit fortress like a blade across flesh. Veratus had not slept. She stood at the window of the chamber Kael'thor had assigned her, a guest suite rather than a prison cell, though she suspected the difference was merely semantic at this point. The bond hummed beneath her skin like a living current. Every few minutes, she felt pulses of emotion that were not her own, Kael'thor's controlled fury, his strategic calculations, his unexpected tenderness when he thought of her. It was maddening. She had spent her life mastering her own mind, building walls that no interrogator could breach, no torture could crumble. And now those walls meant nothing, because the Alpha King could simply feel his way through them. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Enter," she commanded, her hand instinctively moving toward the blade strapped to her thigh. The wolf who stepped inside was not Kael'thor. He was older, perhaps 3 centuries if the silver threading his dark hair was any indication. His face bore the sharp angles of Veilthorn nobility, and his eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, assessed her with clinical detachment. Veratus recognized him immediately. Mavic Sorenvald, head of the King's Council and the most powerful political figure in Veilthorn aside from Kael'thor himself. "Falcon," he greeted, inclining his head a fraction of an inch. "Or should I address you differently now? The protocols become murky when an assassin is revealed to be an abomination." Veratus did not rise to the bait. "Counselor Sorenvald, I assume you are here to inform me of my execution schedule." Direct as always, it is the quality I have always appreciated most about you. Mavic moved further into the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "No, I am not here about your execution. Not yet, at least. Then why are you here?" "To offer you an alternative." His pale eyes glittered with something that looked almost like respect. "The other kingdoms are demanding your head on a spike by sunset. King Aldrich of the Thornmere territories has already drafted a formal declaration of war if the Alpha King refuses. Queen Theswin of the coastal reaches is threatening to withdraw from the Continental Alliance entirely." Veratus absorbed this information without visible reaction. And the Alpha King's response? "That is precisely the problem." Mavic's composed expression cracked slightly, revealing frustration beneath. "He has refused all audiences. He has locked himself in the war room and is apparently rewriting 3 centuries of kingdom law single-handedly. When I attempted to remind him of the political realities we face, he nearly took my head off." Despite everything, Veratus felt a flicker of dark amusement pulse through the bond. Kael'thor was enjoying himself. "The Alpha King does not respond well to pressure," she observed. "The Alpha King has lost his mind." Mavic stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I have served 3 generations of Veilthorn rulers. I have navigated wars, plagues, and 2 attempted coups. I have never seen Kael'thor behave this way." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "What happened in his study last night, Falcon? What did he say to you?" Veratus remained silent. The bond was not common knowledge. Fated mates were rare enough that most wolves never witnessed one in their lifetime. If Mavic discovered that the Alpha King had bonded with a Veilborn assassin, the political fallout would be catastrophic. But her silence told him something anyway. "I see," he murmured, and the calculation in his pale eyes made her skin prickle with warning. then my alternative becomes even more relevant. Speak plainly, counselor. Disappear. The word hung in the air between them. I can arrange passage to the unmarked territories beyond the 5 kingdoms. New identity, new life, no questions. By the time the summit concludes, you will be nothing but a ghost story. The falcon who vanished before she could be caged. It was a reasonable offer. Generous even, considering the circumstances. It was also a test. And what do you gain from my disappearance? Viratus asked softly. Stability. Mavic spread his hands. The Alpha King has ruled effectively for 2 centuries because he does not allow personal attachments to compromise his judgment. Whatever is happening between you and him threatens everything we have built. Remove yourself from the equation and order is restored. You want me gone before the bond fully settles? Mavic's expression flickered. Surprise, quickly suppressed. You know, he breathed. You know what he believes you are to him. I know what I am to him. Viratus held his gaze without wavering. The question is whether you understand what that means, counselor. Because if you are asking me to abandon my mate to face political annihilation alone, you have severely miscalculated. For the first time since she had known him, Mavic Sorenvald looked genuinely afraid. Falcon, my name is Viratus. She stepped forward, and he stepped back, his ancient instincts recognizing the predator beneath her calm exterior. And I suggest you leave this room before I demonstrate exactly why the Alpha King considers me irreplaceable. Mavic retreated without another word. The moment the door closed behind him, Viratus felt a surge of fierce approval through their connection. She glanced toward the window, somehow unsurprised to find Kael'thor standing in the courtyard below, his eyes fixed directly on her chamber. He had been listening. Of course he had been listening. Well played, mate. His voice echoed in her mind, a new development that should have been startling, yet felt as natural as breathing. Viratus pressed her palm against the cold glass. He will try again, she warned silently. Let him. Kael'thor's mental voice was dark with promise. I have waited too long for you to let politics steal you from me. She sensed his absolute certainty, his refusal to accept any outcome that did not include her at his side. It terrified her. Because Viratus had survived her entire life by being expendable, by being replaceable, by being a weapon that could be discarded when its usefulness ended. She did not know how to be someone worth keeping. The formal summit reconvened at midday. Viratus stood in her usual position, 3 steps behind and to the left of the Alpha King's throne. The only difference was that now, every eye in the chamber tracked her movements with naked hostility. She counted 17 wolves who were actively contemplating her assassination. 3 of them had already positioned themselves near exits, which suggested coordinated planning. Another 4 carried concealed weapons that violated summit protocols. The remaining 10 were simply radiating murderous intent strongly enough that even a human could have sensed it. Kael'thor sat on his throne as though surrounded by loyal subjects rather than potential executioners. His posture was relaxed, almost bored, but Viratus felt the coiled tension beneath his calm exterior. He was waiting for someone to make a move. He wanted them to try. We call this assembly to address the matter of the Veilborn, announced King Aldrich of Thornmere, rising from his seat with theatrical gravity. He was a broad-shouldered wolf in his 4th century, with a reputation for brutal efficiency. The purification laws are clear. The creature standing behind your throne, Kael'thor, is an abomination. Her existence is illegal. Her presence here is an insult to every kingdom that sacrificed blood to eliminate this threat 300 years ago. Creature? Kael'thor repeated, his voice mild. That creature has single-handedly prevented 6 wars, eliminated 12 threats to continental stability, and saved my life no fewer than 31 times. What has Thornmere contributed to the Alliance lately, Aldrich? Besides complaints and demands for resources? A ripple of tension moved through the chamber. You cannot deflect this with politics, Aldrich growled. The Veilborn are a plague. Every kingdom agreed. Every kingdom agreed to eliminate a threat. Kael'thor leaned forward, his eyes beginning to glow with suppressed power. My falcon is not a threat. She is an asset. The distinction appears to elude you. She held a wolf suspended in midair with nothing but her mind. This from Queen Theswyn of the coastal reaches, a sharp-featured woman whose territory controlled the major shipping lanes. What happens when she decides to turn that power against one of us? Then you will deserve whatever she does to you. Kael'thor smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Veratus has had the ability to kill everyone in this room for over a decade. The fact that you are all still breathing should tell you something about her restraint. Veratus remained motionless, but internally, she was cataloging the shifting alliances in the room. Aldrich and Theswyn were clearly coordinating, their arguments built on each other too smoothly for coincidence. And in the far corner, watching everything with unsettling stillness, sat a woman Veratus had never seen before. She was young, remarkably young for a summit of this importance, perhaps only 30 or 40 years. Her hair was the color of dried blood, and her eyes were solid black, without whites or pupils. She wore the sigil of no kingdom, carried no visible weapons, and had not spoken a single word since the assembly began. Yet something about her presence made Veratus's Veilborn power stir uneasily. "Who is that?" she asked through their connection. Kael'thor's response carried a thread of grim recognition. Zephyrin Noctis, the last of the oracular bloodline. She serves no kingdom, she serves only the ancient laws. And what does that mean for us? It means someone called her here specifically. The oracles only appear when they intend to deliver judgment, and their judgments cannot be appealed. As if she had heard their silent exchange, Zephyrin Noctis rose from her seat. The chamber fell instantly silent. "Enough," she said, and her voice resonated with harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to the soul. "You bicker like children over laws you do not understand, and history you have deliberately forgotten." "Oracle," Aldrich began, his aggressive posture wilting, "we did not summon." "You did not. But I heard the echo of Veilborn power for the first time in 3 centuries, and I came to see for myself." Zephyrin's black eyes fixed on Veratus. "Step forward, child. Let me look at you properly." Veratus felt Kael'thor's instant resistance, a fierce protectiveness that urged her to stay behind him. But she was not the kind of woman who hid behind anyone, mate or not. She stepped forward. Zephyrin moved through the chamber like a ghost, her footsteps making no sound despite the stone floor. When she reached Veratus, she extended one pale hand and pressed it directly over Veratus's heart. "Oh," she breathed, and for the first time emotion crossed her alien features. "Oh, you poor thing. You have no idea what you are, do you?" "I am Veilborn," Veratus replied evenly, "the last of my kind, apparently." "Veilborn?" Zephyrin laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Is that what they told you? Is that the lie you have carried all these years?" She leaned closer, her black eyes swallowing Veratus's reflection. "You are not Veilborn, child. You are something far older, far more powerful, far more dangerous." The chamber erupted in chaos, but Veratus heard none of it, because Zephyrin's hand was still pressed to her chest, and through that contact visions were flooding her mind. A city burning beneath a crimson sky, wolves screaming as they dissolved into ash, a throne made of bones, and a woman who wore Veratus's face sitting upon it, her hands dripping with the blood of kings. And beneath it all, a voice that was somehow her own, whispering words that made her soul shudder. "They did not hunt us to extinction, because they feared what we were. They hunted us because they knew what we would become." Veratus wrenched herself backward, breaking the oracle's contact. Her heart was pounding, her breath was ragged. Her power was surging beneath her skin, desperate to break free. Zephyrin smiled, a sad, knowing expression that held no malice. "The truth is coming, child. she whispered, "whether you are ready for it or not." The summit dissolved into pandemonium. Kael'thor seized Veratis's arm and hauled her from the chamber before the first accusations could fully form. She did not resist. Her mind was still reeling from the visions the oracle had forced into her consciousness. A woman wearing her face, a throne made of bones, blood dripping from her fingers. "Veratis." Kael'thor's voice cut through the spiral. "Veratis, look at me." They had reached a private corridor, far from the chaos of the summit hall. He gripped her shoulders and turned her to face him, his expression searching. "What did she show you?" "I do not—" Veratis's voice cracked. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I do not know how to explain it." "Try." She felt his need to understand, his fury at the oracle for touching what was his fear. Kael'thor Varys was afraid. In 12 years, she had never once sensed fear from him. He had faced armies, assassins, and supernatural threats without a flicker of hesitation. But now, watching her struggle to process what she had seen, the most powerful alpha in 5 kingdoms was terrified. Not of her, she realized. For her. Something cracked inside Veratis's chest. "She showed me destruction," she whispered. "A city burning, wolves dying by the thousands, and in the center of it all, sitting on a throne of their bones. You," Kael'thor finished, "a version of me, something wearing my face." Veratis shook her head. "The oracle said I am not Veilborn. She said I am something older, something more dangerous." "Do you believe her?" It was a question she had not expected. Kael'thor was not asking whether the oracle was right. He was asking whether Veratis trusted the vision she had been given. Did she? "I believe she showed me a possibility," Veratis said slowly. "Not a certainty. Oracles deal in potential futures, not fixed destinies." "Then we will ensure that future never comes to pass." Kael'thor's grip on her shoulders tightened. "Whatever you are, Veilborn, something older, and something the histories forgot, you are mine, my mate, my falcon. I will burn every kingdom to ash before I let anyone use prophecy as an excuse to destroy you." "That is exactly what they will expect you to say." Veratis met his eyes. "Kael'thor, think strategically for one moment. The oracle just announced to every ruler in attendance that I am potentially the greatest threat the wolf kingdoms have ever faced. Even your allies will turn against you if you protect me now. Then let them turn. You cannot fight a war on 5 fronts. I cannot lose you either." The words tore from him like a wound. She felt the raw depth of his emotion. Centuries of isolation, decades of ruling alone, the slow calcification of a heart that had accepted it would never find its match. And then, against all probability, her. "I waited 243 years, Veratis. I ruled a kingdom I did not care about. I won wars that meant nothing. I built an empire out of pure, stubborn refusal to admit defeat, and none of it mattered until the moment you raised your hand and I felt my soul recognize yours." Veratis stared at him, her carefully constructed walls crumbling further with every word. "I am not worth a war," she breathed. "You are worth everything." He cupped her face in his massive hands, his touch gentle. "The question is whether you believe that." Before she could answer, a howl split the air, the emergency signal that Veratis had hoped never to hear during a diplomatic summit. The fortress was under attack. Kael'thor's head snapped toward the sound, his alpha instincts immediately cataloging threat vectors. That came from the eastern perimeter, the same direction the assassin entered last night. Veratis's mind was already shifting into tactical mode. This is coordinated. The oracle's revelation was meant to distract us. Or to divide us. Kael'thor released her face, his expression hardening into the ruthless mask of a war king. Someone wanted chaos, and they timed their strike perfectly. She felt his calculation, and his conclusion. "You suspect one of the other kingdoms." "I suspect everyone." He began moving toward the eastern wing, his stride eating ground with lethal efficiency. Stay close to me. Whatever is coming, we face it together. Viratus fell into step beside him, not 3 paces behind but at his side, matching his pace stride for stride. It was the first time she had ever walked as his equal rather than his shadow. She tried not to think about how natural it felt. They rounded the corner to the eastern gallery and froze. The attack was not coming from outside the fortress, it was coming from within. Mavic Sorenvald stood at the center of the gallery, surrounded by no fewer than 20 wolves in full combat formation. Behind him, bound in silver chains that smoked against their skin, knelt 3 members of Kael'thor's personal guard. And standing at Mavic's right hand, her pale features composed in cold triumph, was Queen Theswyn of the coastal reaches. "Ah," Mavic said, his gray eyes finding Kael'thor with something that looked almost like regret. "I had hoped you would take longer to respond. This would have been easier with the element of surprise." "Mavic." Kael'thor's voice was deceptively calm. "You have served my family for 300 years. Choose your next words very carefully." "I have served your family because I believed in its right to rule." Mavic drew a blade, ancient, inscribed with symbols that made Viratus's power recoil instinctively. "But you have chosen an abomination over your own kingdom. You have spat on the purification laws. I cannot allow that." "So you commit treason instead?" "I commit necessity." Mavic raised the blade, and Viratus recognized the inscriptions now, Veilborn killing runes, designed to neutralize supernatural abilities. "Surrender the falcon, Kael'thor. Let us execute her according to law, and this ends peacefully." "And if I refuse?" Mavic's expression flickered with genuine sorrow. "Then I am truly sorry, my king, but the Alliance has already voted. You have been removed from power by unanimous decision of the Continental Council." Viratus felt the words hit Kael'thor like physical blows. His own council, his own allies, his own kingdom. They had all betrayed him. For her. "Kael'thor," she said quietly, "let them take me." "No. This is not a battle you can win." I said no. He turned to face her, his eyes blazing gold, his wolf pressing against the surface of his skin. "I will not sacrifice my mate to satisfy traitors and cowards. You will lose everything. I already lost everything the moment I chose to live without you for 243 years. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. No more running. No more hiding." Viratus stared at him, this stubborn, magnificent wolf who was willing to burn his world to the ground rather than let her go. And she made her choice. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. She stepped forward, placing herself between her mate and the wolves who wanted her dead. Her Veilborn power surged to the surface, no longer suppressed, no longer hidden. The air around her began to shimmer with visible energy. "You want me?" she asked softly, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance of ancient power. "Then come and take me." 20 wolves attacked at once, and for the first time in her life, Viratus stopped holding back. The first wolf died before he completed his lunge. Viratus did not touch him. She simply extended her hand, and his body crumpled inward like parchment in a flame. The second and third attackers met the same fate, their momentum carrying them forward even as the life extinguished from their eyes. She had spent 23 years suppressing this power. She had forgotten how intoxicating it felt to let it breathe. The remaining wolves hesitated, their combat training warring with primal terror. They had been told the Veilborn were dangerous. They had not been told that danger could wear a woman's face and unmake them with a gesture. "Hold formation!" Mavic commanded, raising his inscribed blade. "The runes will neutralize her. Press the attack." 4 wolves charged simultaneously, their movements coordinated with military precision. Viratus felt their intent through the energy currents that now sang in her blood, felt the moment they committed to their angles of attack. She did not counter them individually. Instead, She slammed her palms together, and a shockwave of pure force rippled outward. Wolves flew backward, crashing into walls, into each other, into furniture that shattered beneath their weight. But the shockwave cost her. Verades staggered, her vision blurring at the edges. She had not unleashed her power at full strength in over a decade, and her body was no longer accustomed to channeling this much energy. Every ability had limits, even ones that could unmake flesh and bone. Mavic saw her weakness. He charged. The inscribed blade cut through the air toward her throat, its runes flaring with sickly green light. Verades raised her hand to deflect, and the blade passed through her telekinetic barrier like it did not exist. Pain exploded across her forearm as the edge sliced through fabric and flesh. The runes were working, she realized. They were designed specifically to counter abilities like hers, created during the purification as weapons against her kind. "You cannot stop this," Mavic said, pressing his advantage. His blade came down again, and Verades barely twisted away in time. "The runes were forged by oracles 3 centuries ago. Your power means nothing against them." Another slash, another dodge. Blood dripped from her wounded arm onto the gallery floor. She felt Kael'thor's fury, felt him fighting his own battle against the wolves who had positioned themselves between him and her. He was cutting through them with brutal efficiency, but there were too many, and they were buying Mavic time. "Surrender," Mavic urged, his voice almost kind. "Your death does not need to be painful." "My death," Verades replied through gritted teeth, "is not happening today." She stopped trying to use her power against the blade. Instead, she used it on herself. Energy flooded her muscles, her reflexes, and her perception. Time seemed to slow as her enhanced senses catalogued every detail of Mavic's stance, his balance, and his next 3 probable moves. The Veilborn had been known for their external abilities: telekinesis, energy manipulation, matter disruption. But Verades had discovered something else during her years of suppression. She could turn the power inward. She moved. Mavic's blade swept through empty air where she had been standing a heartbeat before. She was behind him now, her uninjured hand closing around his throat from an angle that should have been unreachable. "You made a mistake," she whispered against his ear. "You assumed I only had one way to kill." Her fingers tightened, and Mavic dropped the inscribed blade to claw at her grip. His wolves surged forward to help him, but Kael'thor had finally broken through his opponents, and the Alpha King's massive form slammed into the remaining attackers like a force of nature. "Yield," Verades commanded. Mavic's face was turning purple. His struggles were weakening. "Yield, and I will let you live to face judgment." For a long moment she thought he would choose death over surrender, but survival instinct proved stronger. "I yield," he gasped. Verades released him, and he collapsed to the floor, gulping air. Around them, the remaining attackers had either fallen or surrendered, their weapons scattered across the blood-slicked gallery. Queen Theswin had vanished. Verades catalogued that detail for later. Enemies who escaped had a tendency to become larger problems. Kael'thor reached her side, his chest heaving, his arms splattered with enemy blood. He grabbed her injured forearm, examining the wound with barely contained rage. "This needs attention," he growled. "It will wait." Verades pulled her arm back gently. "We need to secure the fortress. If Theswin escaped, she will be reporting to the other kingdoms. Let them know." Kael'thor's eyes were still blazing with his wolf's presence. "Let them understand exactly what happens to anyone who threatens my mate." Kael'thor. "No." He cupped her face, smearing blood across her cheek in his urgency. "I watched you fight. I watched you bleed. I felt your pain and could not reach you fast enough. Do not ask me to be strategic right now, Verades. Do not ask me to be a king. Right now, I am simply a male whose mate was hurt, and I need." His voice cracked. She felt the depth of his terror, not of the battle, not of the betrayal, but of losing her. Verades had never been needed before. She had been useful, valuable, effective. But no one had ever needed her. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the blood-scented air. "I am here," she murmured. "I am alive. We survived." This time. His hands trembled against her face. "What about next time? Then we face it together." She echoed his earlier words back to him. No more running, no more hiding. Kael'thor exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his massive frame. "Together," he repeated. The words sounded like a vow. 3 hours later, Veratis found herself in the fortress's ancient archive, surrounded by texts that had not been disturbed in centuries. Her arm had been bandaged by one of the few healers who remained loyal to Kael'thor. The wound from the inscribed blade was proving resistant to normal treatment. Apparently, Veilborn killing runes left lasting damage even when they failed to deliver a fatal blow. She would carry this scar forever. It seemed fitting somehow. Kael'thor was handling the aftermath of the coup attempt, securing prisoners, sending messages to allied territories, preparing for the war that was almost certainly coming. He had wanted her beside him, but Veratis had insisted on following a different lead. The oracle's words would not leave her mind. "You are not Veilborn. You are something far older." If that was true, there had to be record somewhere. Evidence. History that had been buried or forgotten. The archive was her best chance of finding answers. She moved through the dusty stacks, her fingers trailing across spines inscribed in languages both familiar and foreign. The oldest texts were stored in the deepest section, manuscripts that predated the founding of the 5 kingdoms themselves. It was there, in a sealed chamber that required 3 separate keys to access, that she found it. A book bound in leather that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its pages were made from a material she did not recognize, thicker than parchment, more flexible than vellum, with a faint luminescence that pulsed like a heartbeat. The title was written in a script she had never seen before. Yet somehow, she could read it. The Chronicle of the Firstborn. Veratis's hands trembled as she opened the cover. The text inside was dense, archaic, and incomplete. Whole sections had been torn out or burned away, but what remained painted a picture that made her blood run cold. Before the Veilborn, there had been another race, the Firstborn. They were not wolves who developed supernatural abilities. They were something else entirely, beings who had existed before the wolf kingdoms, before the separation of the 5 territories, before written history began. The Firstborn had power that made the Veilborn look like children playing with sparks. They could reshape reality itself. And according to the Chronicle, they had not been hunted to extinction. They had chosen to disappear. "We saw what we would become," one passage read. "We saw the destruction our power would inevitably cause. So we scattered ourselves across the generations, diluting our bloodlines until the abilities faded into myth. We became wolves. We became ordinary. We became safe. But the blood remembers. In times of great crisis, when the world stands at a crossroads, a Firstborn will emerge. The power will concentrate in a single vessel, undiluted, unstoppable. And they will be forced to choose, save the world or burn it down." Veratis stared at the words until they blurred. The vision the oracle had shown her, the burning city, the throne of bones, the woman wearing her face. It was not just a possible future. It was a choice she would eventually have to make. "You found it." Veratis spun, her power surging instinctively. Zephyrine Noctis stood in the archive doorway, her black eyes reflecting the luminescence of the Chronicle's pages. "You knew this was here," Veratis said. It was not a question. "I have been waiting 300 years for someone to read it." The oracle moved closer, her footsteps silent. The purification was not about eliminating the Veilborn. It was about preventing the emergence of a Firstborn. It failed. Obviously. Zephyrine's lips curved faintly. "The irony is that their attempt to prevent you made you inevitable. Trauma concentrates power. Every Veilborn they killed, every bloodline they scattered, every child they orphaned. It all fed into the probability matrices. You were born because they were so desperate to stop you from being born. Veratis closed the chronicle carefully, her mind racing. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what is coming. Zephyrine black eyes held something that looked almost like compassion. The 5 kingdoms will unite against you. They will throw everything they have at destroying you, because the prophecies have been passed down through their royal lines for generations. And what can a firstborn do? Whatever she chooses. Zephyrine reached out and touched the chronicle's cover. The Veilborn could manipulate energy and matter. The firstborn can manipulate existence itself. Reality bends around you, Veratis. Then why haven't I? Because you have spent your entire life believing you were limited. The oracle's voice sharpened. You suppressed yourself so thoroughly that you forgot what you truly are. But that is changing now. The bond with your mate is accelerating your awakening. Veratis thought of the battle in the gallery, how naturally the power had flowed once she stopped fighting it. How easy it would be to simply let go. The vision you showed me, she said slowly, the destruction. Is that inevitable? Nothing is inevitable. Zephyrine withdrew her hand. But the pressure is building. The more the kingdoms attack you, the more you will be forced to defend yourself. The more you defend yourself, the more powerful you will become. And the more powerful you become, the closer I get to become the monster they fear. Yes. Silence stretched between them. There is one way to break the cycle, Zephyrine said finally. But you will not like it. Tell me. Walk away. Abandon your mate. Leave the kingdoms entirely. Find a place so remote that no one will ever provoke you again. Veratis felt the suggestion like a blade between her ribs. And if I refuse? Then you will have to find another way to prove that power does not require destruction. Zephyrine turned toward the archive door. But I warn you, no one has ever succeeded. Every firstborn who came before you eventually broke. Everyone? The oracle paused at the threshold. There was one who came close. She is mentioned in the chronicle's final pages, the ones that were not destroyed. Zephyrine glanced back over her shoulder. She was your mother. The words hit Veratis like a physical blow. My mother was a firstborn, the last one before you. She disappeared 30 years ago, shortly after leaving an infant at the gates of a Bleakwood orphanage during the worst snowstorm in recorded history. Veratis could not breathe. Her mother had been like her. Her mother had abandoned her. Her mother might still be alive. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Because the choice you face is the same one she faced. Zephyrine's voice echoed with terrible finality. She chose to run, to hide, to protect you by giving you up. And what happened to her? I do not know. For the first time, the oracle's composure cracked. She vanished so completely that even my sight cannot find her. Either she discovered a way to shield herself from prophecy, or the thing she was running from finally caught her. Zephyrine disappeared into the corridor, leaving Veratis alone with the chronicle and the shattering weight of everything she had just learned. The armies arrived at dawn. Veratis stood on the fortress ramparts beside Kael'thor, watching the horizon fill with wolves. All 5 kingdoms had mobilized, a combined force larger than any assembled since the original purification 3 centuries ago. Banners snapped in the cold wind. War drums echoed across the valley. The message was clear. Surrender the firstborn or face annihilation. I counted their numbers, Kael'thor said quietly. Roughly 30,000. We have perhaps 2,000 loyal wolves remaining in the fortress. Those are not survivable odds. No. He turned to face her, and despite the situation, there was no defeat in his eyes. Only determination. But I did not survive 243 years by accepting the odds I was given. The bond pulsed between them, his certainty feeding into her doubt, her fear feeding into his resolve. They were balancing each other, she realized. complementary forces that together created something stronger than either could be alone. Is that what her mother had been missing? She had spent the night reading the chronicle's final pages. Her mother, a firstborn named Seraphel, had faced a similar moment. The kingdoms had united against her. The prophecies had painted her as a destroyer. She had been alone, without a mate, without anyone who could anchor her. So she had run. And in running, she had left behind an infant daughter who grew up believing she was worthless. Veratis was not worthless. She knew that now, in the deepest part of her soul. Kael'thor's love had shown her a mirror that reflected something other than a weapon or a monster. She would not run. There may be another way, she said slowly, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. The kingdoms are united against me because they believe I will become a destroyer. What if I prove them wrong? How? By doing what no firstborn has ever done. Veratis met his eyes. By using my power to create instead of destroy. Kael'thor frowned. I do not understand. The chronicle spoke of firstborn abilities. Reshaping reality. Bending existence. Everyone assumes that means destruction because destruction is the easiest application of power. But if I can manipulate reality itself, you could manipulate it toward peace, toward proof. Veratis gripped the rampart stone. The kingdoms are afraid because they do not know me. They have only prophecies and legends. But if I demonstrate that my power can heal instead of harm, they will not give you the chance. Kael'thor's expression was pained. The moment you step onto that battlefield, every archer in that army will target you. Then I will not step onto the battlefield. Veratis, I will step above it. She did not wait for his response. She climbed onto the rampart edge, balancing on the narrow stone with careless grace. 30,000 wolves stretched before her, a sea of hostility and fear. Behind her, 2,000 loyal defenders prepared for a battle they could not win. And beneath her skin, power older than kingdoms waited to be unleashed. Veratis raised her hands. Not in attack, not in defense, in offering. She reached deep into herself, past the barriers she had built, past the suppression she had maintained for 2 decades. She found the core of her firstborn heritage, that well of energy that could reshape existence itself. And she pushed. Not outward, not destructively. She pushed down, into the earth beneath the fortress, into the soil and stone and bedrock, into the fundamental structure of the land itself. The ground began to tremble. Screams erupted from the enemy army as the earth shifted beneath their feet. But Veratis was not trying to harm them. She was trying to reach deeper, to touch something that had been sleeping for millennia. There, she found it. The ley lines, ancient channels of natural energy that flowed beneath the surface of the world. They had been dormant since before recorded history, choked by centuries of neglect and spiritual decay. Veratis cleared them. Power surged through the ley lines like water through newly opened floodgates. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The barren ground surrounding the fortress exploded into bloom. Flowers that had not grown in this region for centuries erupted from the soil. Trees that had stood dead for generations suddenly sprouted new leaves. Life poured across the battlefield in a wave of brilliant green. The armies stopped advancing. 30,000 wolves stood frozen, watching as the wasteland transformed into a garden. Wolves who had prepared for death found themselves surrounded by beauty they had never imagined could exist. "What is she doing?" someone shouted. "She is healing the land," another voice answered, awed. Veratis poured more power into the ley lines, feeling them respond to her touch with something that felt almost like gratitude. The chronicle had been wrong, she realized. The firstborn were not destined for destruction. They were meant to be caretakers, guardians, creators. The realization unlocked something inside her, and suddenly she was not just healing the land around the fortress. She was reaching further, across the valley, into the mountains, toward the territories beyond. Everywhere her power touched, dormant ley lines awakened, dying ecosystems revived. The world itself seemed to exhale with relief. She sensed Kael'thor's amazement, and his fierce, overwhelming pride. "That's it," he sent through their connection. "Show them who you really are." The transformation spread for miles. By the time Veratis finally withdrew her power, the entire region had been reborn. And 30,000 wolves had witnessed something extraordinary. A firstborn who chose to create. Veratis swayed on the rampart edge, exhaustion crashing over her. She had poured more energy into that single act than she had used in her entire life combined. Strong arms caught her before she could fall. Kael'thor pulled her against his chest, his heart pounding beneath her ear. "You magnificent woman," he breathed. Below them, the enemy army remained frozen, not in preparation for attack, but in shock. Their formations had dissolved, their war drums had fallen silent. A single figure stepped forward from the army's front lines. Veratis recognized the blood-red hair immediately. Zephyrin Noctis walked across the flower-covered battlefield, her black eyes fixed on the ramparts. When she reached the fortress gates, she raised her voice in the carrying tones of an oracle delivering prophecy. "The firstborn has chosen." The words echoed across the silent battlefield. She has chosen creation over destruction. She has chosen healing over harm. She has chosen to prove the prophecies wrong. Zephyrin turned to face the armies behind her. "The ancient laws are clear. An oracle's judgment cannot be appealed. I declare this firstborn innocent of the crimes her ancestors committed. I declare her worthy of life, worthy of freedom, worthy of the mate bond that ties her to Valthorn's throne." She paused, letting the words sink in. Any kingdom that moves against her now moves against the oracle's judgment. Silence stretched across the battlefield. Then, slowly, the first wolf knelt. Then another. Then a dozen. Then 100. Within minutes, 30,000 wolves had dropped to their knees. Not in fear, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. They knelt to the firstborn who had chosen mercy. They knelt to the woman who had transformed their battlefield into a garden. They knelt to the Alpha King's mate. 1 month later, Veratis stood in the throne room of Valethorn, wearing a crown she had never expected and facing a future she had never imagined. The political aftermath of the Battle of Blooms, as the historians were already calling it, had been complicated. 3 kingdoms had immediately withdrawn their war declarations. The other 2 had required more persuasion, but eventually even they had recognized the futility of fighting someone who could reshape reality. Mavic Sorenvald awaited trial for treason. Queen Theswin had fled to the unmarked territories, her throne claimed by a distant cousin far more interested in stability than conquest. And Veritas had become something she never could have predicted. A queen. "You are thinking too loudly," Kael'thor murmured, appearing at her side with the silent grace that still surprised her. "I can feel your anxiety." "I am not anxious." Veratis kept her eyes on the empty throne room. "I am simply adjusting." To being royalty? To being visible. Kael'thor's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with familiar ease. The bond between them had settled into something steady and warm over the past weeks, a constant presence that reminded her she was never truly alone. "You could hide if you wanted," he offered. "Work from the shadows, as you always have." "That is not the point." Veratis turned to face him finally, finding his eyes watching her with infinite patience. "The point is that hiding is what firstborn have always done. My mother hid. Her predecessors hid. And look where it got them. Hunted, feared, destroyed. So you choose a different path. I choose to be seen." She lifted her chin, the gesture carrying all the defiant pride that had made her the deadliest falcon in Valethorn's history. "I choose to stand beside you openly, as your mate, as your queen, as a firstborn who serves her people instead of terrorizing them. And if they fear you anyway? Then I will earn their trust." Veratis squeezed his hand. One healed land at a time. One choice at a time. Kelthor studied her face, his expression softening. I spent 243 years waiting for you, he said quietly. 243 years, believing my mate either did not exist or would never be found. And then, you raised your hand to save my life, and everything I thought I knew about the world shattered. Do you regret it? Regret finding you? He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his harsh features. I regret every moment I spent before you. I regret every year I wasted believing I was complete without you. Veratis felt tears prick at her eyes, an unfamiliar sensation for someone who had learned to suppress emotion before she learned to walk. I am not easy to love, she warned him. You are difficult to love, he agreed cheerfully. Stubborn, secretive, prone to self-sacrifice, and absolutely convinced that you know better than everyone else. Those are not endearing qualities. They are my favorite qualities. He pulled her closer, his free hand cupping her face with devastating tenderness. You are my mate, Veratis Marwyn. My falcon. My queen. My equal in all things. And I will spend the rest of eternity reminding you that you are worth every sacrifice, every battle, and every moment of chaos that loving you brings. Eternity is a long time. Not long enough. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promises that words could not capture. She felt the full weight of his devotion, his passion, his absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. For the first time in her life, she let herself believe it. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Veratis noticed something through the throne room's tall windows. A falcon circled in the sky above Valethorn, a real one, not the metaphorical title she had carried for so long. It swooped and dove through the air with fierce grace. But as Veratis watched, the falcon suddenly changed course. It flew directly toward the window, landing on the external ledge with an audible thump. Its sharp eyes found hers through the glass, and for one moment, Veratis felt a connection that transcended species. The bird carried something in its talons, a scroll, sealed with wax that bore no insignia. Kelthor noticed her attention and followed her gaze. That is unusual, to say the least. Veratis moved to the window and opened it carefully. The falcon did not flee. Instead, it extended its leg, offering the scroll like a trained messenger bird. She took the message and unrolled it slowly. The handwriting inside was elegant, archaic, and utterly unfamiliar. My daughter, if you are reading this, you have survived what I could not. You have found a way to exist without destroying everything you love. I have watched from afar. I have seen your choices. I am proud beyond words. The path ahead will not be easy. There are forces older than the kingdoms, older than the firstborn themselves, who will not accept what you have done. They believe destruction is inevitable, and they will try to prove themselves right. But you have something I never had. You have a mate who loves you, an anchor who holds you steady, a reason to choose creation over and over again, even when destruction would be easier. Hold on to him. Let him hold on to you. And when the time comes, and it will come, remember that you are not alone. You were never alone. With all my love, Seraphel Veratis read the letter twice, her hands trembling. Her mother was alive. Her mother had been watching. Her mother was proud. Veratis? Kelthor's voice was gentle. What does it say? She handed him the scroll wordlessly, watching his expression shift from confusion to understanding to determination. She is warning us, he said finally. She is preparing us. Veratis looked back at the falcon, which remained on the window ledge as if waiting. Something is coming. Something bigger than the kingdoms, bigger than the prophecies we have already faced. Then we will face it together. Kelthor reached out and laced his fingers through hers again. Whatever comes next. Ancient forces. Challenges we cannot yet imagine. We face it as one. Veratus squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his certainty. She had spent her whole life as a weapon. She had spent her whole life alone. But now she was something else. A mate, a queen, a firstborn who had chosen a different path. And whatever darkness waited on the horizon, she would meet it with her mate beside her and her power ready to create, to heal, to protect. The Falcon of Veilthorn had bowed to no one until she chose to bow to love, and that choice had changed everything.